Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to learn about what a conditional statement is and how to tell if it's true. Then we're going to look at some variations on conditional statements, including the converse, the inverse, the contrapositive, as well as the biconditional in certain videos. So first off, what is a conditional statement? A conditional statement is just a statement, so that means a sentence, with a hypothesis and a conclusion. They could also be thought of as an if-then statement because the words if and then will show up in our conditional. So some examples of a conditional statement might be, if I am hungry, then I will eat dinner. And if a quadrilateral is a rectangle, then it has 4 right angles. You notice in both of these examples we have the word if, we have a comma, and then we have the word then. So a conditional statement is just a statement that has a condition, and if that condition's met, then something else will happen. You notice that we can use conditional statements in mathematical concepts or for non-mathematical concepts as a logical structure. So the two key parts of a conditional statement are the hypothesis and the conclusion. The hypothesis is the if part. So this might be a little bit different from what you are familiar with the term hypothesis in science, where hypothesis is kind of a guess. In our case, the hypothesis is the antecedent. It's what's happening first. So we often represent the hypothesis with the letter P. You'll also notice I highlighted it yellow, so we can use that to help us identify the hypothesis throughout this lesson. The conclusion is the then part of the sentence, which is represented by a Q. So let's look at those two examples and identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. If I am hungry, then I will eat dinner. Well, this part has the if statement, so that must be my hypothesis. So the hypothesis is if I am hungry. The conclusion is the then part, so then I will eat dinner. That is going to be my conclusion. If a quadrilateral is a rectangle, we have the if, so that is the hypothesis. The part after the then is going to be our conclusion. So how do we know if a statement is true? In mathematics, having something be true is very, very important. So when you're looking at if a statement is true, you are only looking at the cases that apply to the hypothesis. And if the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is always true, then we have a true statement. So let's consider our first statement. If I am hungry, then I will eat dinner. So think in your life about all the times that you are hungry. Do you always eat dinner after those times? Probably not. Maybe you have a snack. Maybe you get a drink of water. Maybe you eat breakfast because it's the morning. So that statement might not be true because if we think about all the situations where you are hungry, they don't always result in eating dinner. But if the statement is true, every time you are hungry, you must eat dinner. In the second statement, think about all the quadrilaterals that are rectangles, because that is the only set of things that we are considering. Because we have to only look at cases where the hypothesis is true. I don't care about a triangle. I don't care about a parallelogram here. I am only looking at rectangles. Is it possible to draw a rectangle that does not have 4 right angles? No, it's not. Every rectangle that you have will have 4 right angles, so that statement is true. And that is what we state here. In the second example, we are only looking at situations with rectangles. Does every rectangle have 4 right angles? Yes, it does. Therefore, the statement is true because every time the hypothesis was true, the conclusion was also true. So another example, if a piece of furniture is a table, then it has 4 legs. Is this true? Can you think of a table that does not have 4 legs? What about this one? We have come up with a table, so we met the first part that did not meet the second. So that statement is not true. Conditional statements are great, but in mathematics, we also like to make variations on conditional statements. And there are 3 main variations. The first variation is the converse. To have a converse, you switch the hypothesis and conclusion. So instead of saying if P then Q, we can say if Q then P. Our second is the inverse. In the inverse, you are negating the hypothesis and conclusion. Negating means to make it the opposite. So if something says you are hungry, then you are not hungry. If you have 4 sides, you would say it does not have 4 sides. And we describe that as if not P, then not Q. And we represent that word not, like that negative word, with these little squiggles or tildes. So that's describing that it is not P and not Q. But you notice that we still start with the hypothesis and end with the conclusion. And then finally, we have our contrapositive. The contrapositive is the mixture of the converse and the inverse. You negate both the hypothesis and conclusion, and you switch them. So when I'm creating the contrapositive, I like to create the inverse first, so put in that word not, and then switch the parts around. One key thing about the converse is that you still are going to start with the if and end with the then, but the statements that come after that will be switched. So let's try an example. We're going to write the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive of the following statement. If a polygon has 3 sides, then it is a triangle. So our first step is to write the converse. In the converse, we're going to switch the hypothesis and conclusion. So we could say, if it is a triangle, then a polygon has 3 sides. So you notice that I switched the is a triangle and has 3 sides. But something about this sentence doesn't make perfect sense. It's weird in the English language to start a sentence with if it. Normally we would put a more specific noun there so that people know what your sentence is about. So what we could do is say if a polygon is a triangle, then it has 3 sides. Because the A polygon is not actually part of the hypothesis or conclusion, it's just the subject of the sentence. And if we keep that subject at the beginning rather than having a pronoun there, it's going to make it more specific and more understandable to people who are reading. As we're writing our converse, inverse, and contrapositive, we're following the standard rules of English, and we want to make sure that our writing is clear. So now let's try our inverse. To do the inverse, we negate the hypothesis and conclusion of a conditional statement. So we're going to go back to our original statement and add in that word not. If a polygon does not have 3 sides, you notice because we're speaking in English, I had to change the phrase from, I'm not going to say not has, I'm going to say does not have, because that's how we say the negative part of has in the English language. So if a polygon does not have 3 sides, then it is not a triangle. So all I did was add in that word not to make it negative. Finally, for our contrapositive, we will take that inverse and flip it around. So if a polygon is not a triangle, so that is, I switched it around and it's negative, then it does not have 3 sides. So I switched it and I made them both negative.